Hey and welcome everyone. Today is episode 5 of the AKS Zero to Hero series that Gregor and myself are doing. In today's episode, I'm going to show Gregor how to actually deploy an AKS cluster using the Azure CLI. Hopefully, we're all going to learn something new today and we'll be on our journey to the hero.
Cool. Quick question, why are we doing this CLI?
So the CLI, in my opinion, is a better tool than the PowerShell, mainly because, from my understanding, the actual team who create the AKS system have to create the tooling themselves, and most of them are Linux based, and so they sort of have that skill set of using Bash scripting. So the CLI goes really well with that. And
Okay.
PowerShell is sort of a second thought to them, I believe. Don't ever quote me on that, but that's how it comes across. Yeah. So always use the CLI, never use a PowerShell, because the CLI has newer things than PowerShell. I can show you a little screenshot of that later on the website.
So we're fans of PowerShell. We're not bashing it. We're just going to use the CLI because it gives you better options for AKS.
Yeah. You got to remember AKS was built for Linux originally, so all of the Bash stuff is more important to the community than PowerShell. But PowerShell is catching up. Maybe one day it'll be on par, but just not yet.
So if I'm an ops person, should I be looking at the CLI, or can I get away with still using PowerShell?
Personally, go for the CLI. I'm an ops guy myself. It took a little bit of time to get used to it, but now it's my go-to resource. Anything AKS related is AZ CLI. In fact, pretty much any resource I deploy in Azure, I use the CLI for now. So definitely invest some time on that. Okay, you can wrap the CLI in PowerShell. That's all fine. So you can still use a bit of PowerShell, but you actually see me use a bit of PowerShell here. But the actual commands to deploy the cluster is all done with this CLI.
Okay, let's get on that then. Let's go.
Cool. So I'm just going to share my screen quickly.
I'm going to try and sit down so I don't get my cloud head today.
Cool. So here we have a PowerShell script. Even though I said don't use PowerShell, it's a PowerShell with the AZ CLI wrapped in it. So what you can see here is I'm setting some variables first. So I'm doing the environment variable is the name I'm giving it, so 0 to hero. Then I'm going to create a variable for the actual Kubernetes cluster name. So I'm using AKS dash and then the environment name above. Then I talked about in a previous video about Azure Active Directory groups. So I showed that in the portal videos. I did one before this one. So here I'm just giving it a name, AKS admin group. I'm putting a tag value of AKS, so I can tag my resources so I know that they are for AKS, because obviously we're creating different resources, not just an AKS cluster. The location is very simple, West Europe. Container registry name, ACR, and then environment name. So ACR stands for Azure Container Registry, and I'm replacing any dashes that may be in my environment name because the ACR doesn't like dashes because it has to be DNS and all of that stuff. This one here, the K8S server or K8 server name, does a little AZ CLI command to get the default Kubernetes version for that region. You could just set a region yourself here, but I prefer to set the default version because it's the middle version. So in the previous video, we were seeing a list in the portal, and this is the one in the middle, basically. Right. Set some VM node sizes, standard DS2 v2, which is the standard ones you get with AKS, and then a name for the node pool. So if you remember in the previous one, we talked about node pools. So I'm just giving it a name here called Linux 1. Before, I think it was called Agent Pool. You can call it whatever you like. If it's a Windows container, it can only be 6 characters long. Linux can be a bit longer. Setting a node count of 2. So I only want 2 in this because it's a demo. Usually you have 3. Then we go down to resource group name. So I'm creating a few resource groups here. So because we're using CLI, we can do a bit more than the portal. So here I'm doing a resource group name for the actual AKS cluster resource, so the control plane. Then I'm also creating one for the node. So before, when we did it in a portal, I said it creates a horrible resource group, and this way you can actually overwrite it and call it something nice. So we're calling it rg-aks-nodes and then the environment name. Then I created another resource group just for some shared resources for the demo, and the container registry is just going to basically go in this shared one as well. So that's what we're doing here. We're actually also going to create a monitoring workspace, so a log analytics workspace to put container insights on as well, which is really cool. You could do that through the portal as well, but it's just so easy to do it through CLI. So we're just giving it a name here, again, without any dashes. And then we've got to create a VNet because we're going to use advanced Kubernetes networking. So I'm going to create a VNet first so we can add, and it creates subnets. So that's all cool. And then the actual fun starts. First off, we create the resource groups. But first, let me just bring up a terminal window. And then I will wait for that to load, pop that up here. And then I'm just going to log into Azure first. So we'll do AZ login. It's just going to open up another window for me where I'm just going to log in. So bear with me. Just got to do a bit of two-factor authentication. Always enable two-factor authentication because you've got to keep your Azure resources secure. So I'm using just the Microsoft Authenticator app for that. Cool. So we're just logging in now. Got a few errors. Ignore that. It's just because I've been playing with some other different subscriptions that my account's logged into and everything. So I'm going to set my subscription to be, which one should I do today? Got too many. Let's do this one, my MVP subscription, because I've got some credits left on that.
I'm glad somebody does.
Go back. Yeah, they go so quick. Easy account set. Subscription, and we're just so we're just doing AZ account set -s and then the subscription name. So -s is --subscription is just shorthand. There we go. So we're in my subscription now. So that's awesome. So I'm just going to go back to this and copy basically all of the environment variables. And I'm just going to actually switch this over to PowerShell as well, because that's a bash window and we need to work in PowerShell. So I'm just going to paste those in. And all the variables are set, so I'm just going to clear the screen again. And then we will deploy our resource groups. So we're just using the AZ group create command, nice and easy. Saves clicking in the portal. I'll paste that in there.
You could run this in Visual Studio Code, yeah?
Yeah, you can do. I just think it's nicer and bigger to see in here than in Visual Studio Code. So hopefully people can read it a lot easier. So once we've created the resource groups, we then go on to create the virtual network. So we use the AZ network VNet create command. We give it a name from above in the parameters, same as a resource group. Here we're using a /16 for the network prefix, so that gives us loads of IP addresses, and we can then create some subnets inside it. So the first subnet I'm going to create is a cluster node subnet with a /20. Because we're using advanced networking, this is where all the pod IP addresses as well as the node IP addresses will go. So /20 gives us a lot of IP, so we can scale up, we can do cluster upgrades, and all of that fun stuff. And obviously we're tagging it with the environment variable as we set. Next, we're going to create another subnet called clustering services. So this is sometimes where I like to put sort of internal ingresses and stuff like that. So I'm just doing a /28 because I don't really do much with that. And then an application gateway. So sometimes I use application gateway ingress controller, which is still technically in private preview if you use the AKS add-on. But if you use the Helm chart deployment, then you can use that. So instead of having a separate subnet and a separate VNet for that, I like to put inside one subnet and it's nice and easy. Just create it now. I just prefer to create resources like at the beginning rather than going back and create them at a later stage. So literally, I'm just going to copy and paste that code in here, and it'll go off and create all these nice resources for us. There's one. So that's the VNet created and the first subnet. Now it's going to create the second subnet, and now it's just about to create the third subnet. So again, so much easier than clicking in the portal. If you want to sort of do this several times, you know,
Yes,
so much easier. You can actually just create these as functions and then just run a nice command at the end. So now, before, if you were creating an Azure Container Registry, you'd have to do it separately in the portal. You can't do it at the same time in its creation. So, you know, in this script that we got here, we can actually just use the ACR create command, and it will create us a nice basic Azure Container Registry in that resource group and tag it, which is awesome. So we'll just copy and paste that in here, and that'll go off, create the Azure Container Registry for us. You know, it's just nice and easy, a few lines and it's done. And then we have the log analytics workspace. So before in the portal, we could click create a new one and attach it, but it would have a horrible sort of resource group name and everything like that, or name. So here we can use the Azure CLI again and create a nice name and create a SKU and everything. So again, just another copy and paste. Obviously, all this code will be available up in the Git repo, so you don't have to remember it all now. But you can build on top of this script. You know, you can create the functions, as I said. You can put lots of your own parameters in, and maybe look at creating sort of private links between different resources like databases and the AKS VNet. You can do so much more with it, basically, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Any questions so far, or are you?
No, all good.
Cool. So while that's creating, carry on.
I did see one line in your script that I would like you to change, if it's all right. Go back to your script.
Oh yeah. Let's have a little look. Which one?
Scroll up the top.
Yeah.
I saw location West Europe.
Yeah.
Going right up top. So can you pass that dollar location into line 7, where you've got West Europe on line 7?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. That can definitely be in there.
Just jumped out at me.
We'll make sure that's right in the source code.
Yeah. So the good thing about this script is all the variables are at the top. So from here on down, nothing's hard coded.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I see a lot of people's scripts where like locations hard coded and things like that, and people don't realise that if you need to run that script at a different environment or a different region, then you have to go and manually change it all. So I like the way your script's got all that at the top. So that's the only part you need to change.
Yeah, obviously there are some hard-coded values here, like network addressing, just because these are the ones that I always use, because I know they work. So I've hard-coded them, but you could, if you really wanted to, create them as variables as well, and the same with the subnet names. But I find that it works, you know, because you don't sort of have your AKS cluster on a domain or anything. You don't have to really care about IP overlaps too much, but some people do, so you can change that. But yeah, so we created the log analytics. Oh yeah.
Sorry, on you go.
No, carry on.
No, I was just going to ask you what the next line is. 68.
68. Yep. So here, so because we are naming the resource group for the AKS cluster for the nodes to sit in, currently it's been in preview for a long time, but it's not actually a preview feature. It's just in the CLI as a preview add-on, which is a pain. So all you have to do is basically run this little extension command to add the extension. It's not going to cause too many issues or anything like that. I've already got it installed, so it says it's already installed. But it's definitely worth doing, because otherwise you get that horrible resource group name, and you don't want that at all. So lines 70 and 71. So 70 gets you the ID of the subnet, the VNet we created. So the subnet name will be cluster nodes, because that's the first subnet where all of the nodes and pods sit. So we get the resource ID of that. And then we also get the resource ID of the log analytics workspace we created, because we're going to use those and inject those into the next script. which is AZ AKS create. And there's quite a few parameters on here. There's actually a lot more parameters than I'm using, but these are the defaults that I would recommend. So obviously, the resource group, the name that we set earlier, how many nodes, the name of the Linux node pool, the VM size, the node resource group, which is why we've enabled the preview. We're going to generate some SSH keys to be able to connect up to the nodes at a later date if needed. So that will just get stored into your, if you're using Windows, the sort of username directory .ssh folder. We're going to use the network plugin Azure, so we talked about that in the previous video as well. So always use that if you can. We're going to enable managed identity, so we don't have to worry about service principal passwords expiring or anything like that. It's literally just a nice one line. Before, you used to have to create service principal, Azure AD application registration, enterprise apps, and all that stuff. Now it's just this one little switch. It does it all for you. It's awesome. Cluster autoscaler. So if the cluster nodes are running out of resources because you've got too many pods, it will scale up. The minimum node count I use as the node count value, so 2 in this case. Maximum I'm just set to 10. That is hard coded just because I know my customers and myself. I know how much it's going to go up to. So 10 is a good limit for myself because of how much I want to spend. And obviously I'm on my MVP credit, so I don't want to go too high. I could set it as a variable and it could be any number, but I know I've set it as 10. It's never going to change. This sub ID is the ID of the subnet above. And then we've got zones. So this is the availability zone. So we talked about that last week quite a lot, about the sort of different data centers in an Azure region at the same sort of site, but they use different power or different cooling. So we're going to spread it over the 3 availability zones in West Europe. So this actually doesn't just do the node pool, it does the control plane, the master bit. That's all managed by Microsoft, so that's really cool. And then we've got the Kubernetes version from above, from the parameters, it just injects it there. So by default, OS disk types are now ephemeral, but I like to put it in the code because then I know this cluster is a newer cluster and it's got that set. We set this disk size to 80 gig, so the OS disk size is 80 gig. You have to set this value because not all VMs have the default 127 gigs available to them when you use an ephemeral disk. So I like to set it to 80 on these VM size. We enable an add-on called monitoring, and then we give it the workspace ID that we created earlier, and then we just tag it. So I'll just copy all of that, and we'll pop it back over to this. Now, this obviously, as we found last time, takes a little bit of time. So we'll just let this run. I'll get to the end of the script and push enter. And while that's running, I'm going to actually flick over to a different window. So here, this is the PowerShell commands that I talked about earlier to create a new AKS cluster. So the command you would use is new-AKS cluster, AZ AKS cluster. You can generate your SSH keys, your VM set types, subnet IDs, all that stuff. So there's quite a lot of parameters, switches here, as you can see. It looks like it's quite a lot, but just wait until you see the CLI version, which I'm going to bring up now. So let's just do AZ AKS CLI. We'll just do a quick Google search on that. Go over to here, and we'll go down to create. So this is the command AZ AKS create. That's what we just ran. And look how many more parameters you get. It's ridiculous. So much more. So that's why you should always try and use the AZ CLI rather than PowerShell, because you can just do a lot more with it. A lot more than you can even with the portal. So yeah.
Interesting. Good to know.
Yeah, definitely bookmark these kind of, search for them and then bookmark them. The AZ AKS command, CLI commands, there's so many different ones you can do in here. You can disable add-ons, get credentials, get upgrades. You can even install.
Yeah, I'm just saying. Sometimes people say, "Why do you do AZ CLI over PowerShell?" This is one decent example of why you might want to do that. Is it the same for other services, or?
So I find it, yes. It all depends, like I say, on the team and what they prefer creating, because I am led to believe, and I could be wrong, but the team creates the tooling themselves. There's not a separate team that creates it. So if that team prefers Bash and the CLI, then that's what they will focus on. So I'm thinking like the open source stuff in Azure, you probably find the AZ CLI is a lot more complete and feature rich than the PowerShell version. So while that's let's go and have a little look. So yeah, still running. So one thing I did want to show back in the in this window is we've got this command called install CLI. You probably heard me mention kubectl in one of the first videos I think we did. It's quite hard to actually install. It's not the easiest, and especially if you're having multiple systems. But what you can actually do here, which is really cool, there's an AZ CLI command to actually install the kubectl agent. So you just use AZ AKS install -CLI and it will install it. And then you've got these optional parameters to choose an install location and all that stuff. So it just explains it all down here. The default location obviously is here, so that'd be like your root home folder .azure-kubectl. So it's so much easier to do that than it would be to go off to download it from Google and try and set it up and everything like that. So definitely look at that. Remember that command, because if you jump on a new workstation or something, or you've just had to wipe your machine and you need to get access to your cluster quickly, just do that straight away. So whilst that's still building, let's have a little look in the Azure Portal to see what's being created. So I'll just sign into this subscription. Get rid of these recommendations. You should probably look at those.
Everybody just click closes it.
Yeah, gets in the way.
In your face, close it.
Yeah. So let's just filter it down to this one subscription so we can see what we got. And you can see the so these are some previous AKS clusters with the horrible resource group name that we created before. And then we've got this, got so many here. So we've got the RG AKS 0 to hero. So that's the new resource group we've created. And then we've got the RG shared 0 to hero. And then we should hopefully have, once it starts being created, we'll have the nodes here, just here. So this is that. This resource group replaces these horrible MC weird ones. So they're really cool. So if we go inside that, you can actually see some of the resources being created.
It's a good tip for that naming convention.
Why is that not showing us any resources?
Does it still build?
It might. Yeah, probably is. Let's have a little look. No, it's built. Let me refresh. It could be because I've had to resize the screen resolution.
Do a refresh on site.
It's because of this little.
Oh.
So yeah, you can see the resources there. It's because they have so much stuff up the top here.
You can hide the essentials, I think. See what it says essentials, the arrow above.
Good shout. There we go. So yeah, you can see all of the resource group stuff. So we created the agent pool managed identity. It's created the OMS managed identity. So the OMS agent is log analytics workspace. They still call it OMS, even though that's died. We've got the VM scale set. We've got the Kubernetes load balancer, network security groups, public IP addresses. So that's all there. That's just been created by that command, which is now finished, which is awesome. So next, if we go back to the script.
So you could theoretically blow that resource group away and just run it again. That script again and recreate them. And so that's the power of putting in a script and rather than doing a portal.
Exactly. And you know, with the power of PowerShell, you can actually put this in some for each loops or check loops to see, does that resource already exist? If it does, move on to the next one. If it doesn't, create it. You know, so you can do some powerful things with this. So here we can now like attach it to the Azure Container Registry we created, We could integrate it to Azure AD. So I'm not going to run these commands now, but they're up here to show you what you could do. And so, like I said, this will be all available in the GitHub repo. But what we can actually do now is actually get our kube config file, so we can actually connect to a Kubernetes cluster for the first time, which is quite exciting. So we're going to use the AKS get-credentials command, which is, again,
is that doing the same thing as like when you do it in the portal and you get the reconnect tab, you get the first couple of commands? Is that the same thing?
Yeah, exactly. So that one of those commands would be set subscription, but we're already set the subscription. The next one will be this command, but with the actual resource group names here. So that's merged this cluster AKS 0 to hero into my kube config file, which sits under home PixelRobots. So that's my user root .kube and then /config. So now I can actually do kubectl get nodes, and it should give me. Did I spell that right? Oh no. So I don't actually have kubes. I don't actually have kubectl installed by the looks of it. So what I can do is AKS.
Here's what I planned earlier.
Install CLI. So that command I talked about earlier, I can just install kubectl like that. Except that's not worked.
Is that because you're in? Oops. You just type.
Let's switch over to a different PowerShell, a different window, because I do most of my things in Bash. So we do kubectl get no. Yeah, kubectl get nodes, because we've already done the config.
Got a typo there again.
See, this is why I copy and paste and
I'm glad you're typing, because that would be even worse. So, yeah, I've got terrible.
There we go. There we go. So that's our cluster. It's running version 19.6. It's been up for 5 minutes, 40 something seconds. We've got the 2 nodes. We can then use the kubectl get pods, which should just show us none because we haven't deployed anything. And we can do kubectl get all on all namespaces. So we talked about namespaces, and you can see by default there's a lot of stuff already installed, and this is just to get the cluster up and running, which is really cool. So you've got your OMS agent, which is your log analytics agent. You've got your core DNS, your kube proxy, your IP, your Azure CNI networking. Got your Kubernetes service, which is always there. And you can see these IP addresses are internal to the cluster service, which is just the default IP range. We talked about that in the previous one. We've got daemon sets, deployments, replica sets, and yes, it's all there by default, which is really cool.
Okay, I've got a stupid question here. Do kubectl get nodes again?
Yeah.
So when you excuse me, when you were creating the PowerShell, you asked it for 2 nodes. How do you know which one's the kind of the master, the control
So
plane?
these 2 are actually worker nodes. You don't ever get to see the master control plane. That's all managed by Microsoft, and you can never see that through here. So that's really cool to know. So that's a good question. Yeah.
Okay.
You can always do this out wide. So -O for output, and then wide, and you actually get a bit more information. Okay. So you can find out that it's running Ubuntu 18.04. It's running containerd and not Docker, as it's Docker runtime, or it's container runtime, and what version it's using and everything like that. So that's quite cool to know as well.
Another daft question. OS images Ubuntu 18.04. Did you say that anywhere, or was it just? Does it just?
No, that's just the default one. Yeah.
Can you change that?
There are ways you can create a custom image and deploy a custom image, but it's probably wise not to, because it's AKS managed service. They update it every week as well, so it's always up to date. Security patches get applied every night, so if there is a security patch, you'll install the patch every night, and then it's up to you to reboot it. But you can actually update the container OS image weekly with all the latest updates and patches and everything. So definitely we'll be going over that in a later video, because it's very important to keep your cluster up to date.
So we're currently at the same position we were at last week at the moment when we did the portal?
Yes. Yep. So except all we've done now this week is also connected up to the cluster, and we can actually see some nodes running and see some services running. We connected in a way to the portal last time because we went through the portal and we see the resources. So it's kind of like doing the same thing through CLI or through the portal. But yeah, we're definitely, I think we're getting to the point where we can actually start looking at containerizing our application and then trying to deploy that next, which will be good.
I was thinking before we started this, just grab a MVC ASP.NET Core type thing and just, well, I think we'll just do file new ASP.NET Core web app and just try and containerize that.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Might be a good place to start. Shall we do that? Is that what we're going to plan to do in the next video, or do we have anything else?
I think, yeah, let's start with that next. I think that'll be a good way to start learning more kubectl commands and understanding what you can do with it. So we'll be going through like a Docker file as well during that, because to build a container image, you need to have a Docker file. So we'll go through all of that and we'll show off how we're going to build a Docker file based off the app that you create for us.
Okay, so if you're not familiar with Docker, we shall be going over that, so don't worry. We'll cover how to create the Docker file and what the commands and all that needs. So don't worry, we've got your back. So, cool. Okay, so
we'll even show you how to install Docker for desktop as well. So it'll be good.
Good idea. Good idea.
Yeah.
I'll look forward to it.
Cool. So thanks everyone for watching today's episode. It's been awesome teaching you guys. If this video has been helpful at all, please give it a thumbs up because it really helps the channel. And please click the notification bell to be alerted for the next release, all about Docker containers and Docker files. And don't forget to subscribe as well.
Cool. So on to episode 6 next week.
Yes, gonna be fun.
Oh, cool. Right. On with the show then. Bye everyone.
Bye.